Qui Gon Jinn was perhaps the greatest Jedi alive. A commanding presence at council, a strong and brave warrior who refused to be intimidated by even the most daunting challenge, and a good and kind man. So spoke Obi-Wan Kenobi, the last apprentice of Jedi Master Qui Gon Jinn, accurately summing up his master's character. Qui-Gon existed on the periphery of the Skywalker saga. He lived long enough to see the saga begin, but not much longer, and he died before the onset of the Clone Wars, when the story of the Chosen One really kicked off. But Qui-Gon nonetheless played a crucial role in some of the most important events in galactic history, by virtue of being the one to find Anakin Skywalker and bring him to Coruscant. He was the one who brought the Chosen One into play in the great battle between the Jedi and the Sith, and thus, it was only because of him that the Jedi ultimately triumphed in that millennia-long contest. Furthermore, he was the perfect Jedi to do so, the best possible introduction to the Order that Skywalker could have had. In this video, we're going to be exploring why.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
Qui Gon Jinn was a bit of an oddball. He cared little for rules or dogmas, preferring to go out and experience the universe, helping whoever he could. His master, Dooku, considered him to be solitary, but Jinn nonetheless cared about the lives of pretty much everyone and everything around him. He was always open to opinions, even when it wasn't all that tactful, and he had a strong sense of righteousness. Many Jedi believed him to be strange, wayward, and above all, maverick. All perceptions that Jinn himself never cared to change. Additionally, like certain Star Wars fans, he didn't bother much with his physical appearance, considering grooming to be a waste of time. All of these qualities set him apart from other Jedi, who were usually much more disciplined. This gave rise to the perception, both in-universe and out-of-universe, that Jinn was a grey Jedi. Some saw his frequent arguments with the Jedi Council to be indicative of this, believing that Qui-Gon had disagreements with Jedi dogma because he stayed close to the dark side. But the opposite was actually true. Qui-Gon was a paragon of the light side, the living embodiment of what the Jedi were supposed to be. He did what the Force guided him to do, even when it meant disobeying guidance from the Jedi Council, which usually meant getting involved in the everyday struggles of beings he met in his travels, such as Jar Jar Binks or Anakin Skywalker. As Yoda put it, he was the true knight, always roaming the galaxy on a quest to help others. Of course, Qui-Gon wasn't always the perfect Jedi. It took decades to develop into the man the Force needed him to be. He was, as with virtually all Jedi, brought to the temple in Coruscant at an early age and spent the first decade of his life training as a Jedi initiate. By the age of 10, he was selected as a Padawan by then Jedi Knight Dooku, who chose him mostly for his skill. Qui-Gon was a bit distant from his master, who he viewed as cold and harsh, but he nonetheless learned much from Dooku and became one of the Jedi Order's most prominent Padawans. Qui-Gon became a Jedi Knight in his own right at the age of 20 in 72 BBY, and soon enough, he took his own Padawan. Over the course of his life, Jinn took on 3 Padawans. The first, Femor, was a promising young pupil who quickly rose to the rank of Jedi Knight. In turn, Jinn became a Jedi Master and, encouraged by his first success, took on a second Padawan almost immediately, a troublesome youngling called Xanatos. He was already familiar with the boy, as Jinn was the one who discovered him and brought him to the temple. Xanatos was 3 years old at the time, rather old for an initiate, and was the son of Cryon, a wealthy nobleman from Telos IV. Many of his instructors, Yoda included, thought he was trouble. He was brash and aggressive and had a desire for power, all things that the Masters feared could lead him to the dark side. Qui-Gon, however, ignored these concerns and trained Xanatos anyway. In 53 BBY, Xanatos' training was nearing completion, and Jinn was sure he was soon to become a Jedi Knight. But the Council had one last mission for the pair before Xanatos would be allowed to face the trials, a mission to Telos IV, the Padawan's homeworld. In the years since he gave his son to the Jedi, Qui-Gon had become the planet's governor and was struggling to deal with an armed rebellion over a recent murder. Jinn and Xanatos were dispatched to resolve the issue, something that left the Padawan conflicted, as he feared a return home. On Telos, Jinn and Xanatos were reunited with Qui-Gon and got to work investigating the murder and the rebellion. During the mission, Xanatos struggled with his emotions, especially as the situation on Telos escalated and Qui-Gon was thrust further into the spotlight. At the end of a tumultuous investigation, the Jedi discovered that Qui-Gon had been behind the whole thing. He had arranged the murder and the rebellion to consolidate his own power. Jinn and Xanatos went to arrest him, but the confrontation turned violent, and in the resultant skirmish, Jinn was forced to kill Qui-Gon. This enraged Xanatos, who fell to the dark side and attacked his now former master. Jinn had the upper hand, but the battle was interrupted by the arrival of a crowd celebrating Qui-Gon's death. The crowd carried away Qui-Gon's body and Xanatos managed to slip into it during the chaos, escaping Jinn and fleeing for parts unknown. Jinn was distraught at what he saw as his failure to save Xanatos from himself, and he spent the next few years coming to terms with that failure. He spent hours with Yoda and many other Jedi Masters trying to work through what he had done wrong and where he could improve, but they were ultimately only able to help him to a degree. Qui-Gon would have to find the answers himself, and to that end, he set off on a long series of missions in the far reaches of the galaxy, returning to Coruscant only on rare occasions. He kept in touch with the Jedi Council, who supplied him with more quests and routinely requested that he consider taking on a third Padawan. Jinn refused to do so for years, but nonetheless returned to Coruscant annually at their behest to watch the initiates train. It was over the course of his wanderings that Jinn became the outcast we all know and love, and it was also during this time that Jinn developed his unique approach to the Force. As a lightsider, Jinn let the will of the Force guide his every action, but he preferred to discern the will of the Force by following his instincts rather than through meditation. He came to join a minority of Jedi who believed in focusing on the living Force, keeping his thoughts centered on the present and feeling the Force through the lives of those around him. This philosophy opened him up to the possibility of becoming a Force ghost after death, and it shaped him into the Jedi Master he was always meant to be. In 44 BBY, 8 years after the fall of Xanatos, Jinn finally took on a third Padawan, Obi-Wan Kenobi. Initially, Jinn had actually declined to take Kenobi as a Padawan, seeing him as too aggressive and headstrong, and Kenobi ended up being assigned to the Agricultural Corps. Yoda disagreed with this decision, however, and assigned Kenobi to the Agri-Corps branch on the planet Bandomir, which was where Jinn's next mission was. Jinn and Kenobi ended up being reunited on Bandomir, and after a series of misadventures, Qui-Gon decided to give the boy a second chance, taking him as a Padawan. Over the course of the next 12 years, Jinn and Kenobi had many adventures together, traveling to the far reaches of the galaxy and helping those in need. Jinn passed on all that he had learned to Kenobi, and the two ended up working well together, developing a much closer relationship than Jinn had with his master. Kenobi quickly matured and started to act as a check on Jinn's wandering ways, keeping him honest when it came to obeying the Council and helping him focus on his missions. Jinn, in turn, kept Kenobi focused on the living Force and helped broaden his horizons by exposing him to all manner of alien cultures. Over the years, the two battled pirates and terrorists, intervened in civil wars, and even had a few more run-ins with Xanatos, who Jinn ultimately slew. Despite having been a Jedi Master for decades, Jinn continued to learn from these experiences, overcoming new personal challenges and discovering more about the living Force. In doing so, he was unknowingly preparing himself for his most important act, the discovery of the Chosen One. We all know the story well. On a mission to Naboo, which had been blockaded by the Trade Federation, Qui Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi ended up fleeing the planet with Queen Amidala, and were forced to stop on Tatooine for repairs before proceeding to Coruscant. There, Qui-Gon met Anakin Skywalker, a young slave boy with incredible strength in the Force, whom he quickly came to believe was the Chosen One. Skywalker accompanied him, Kenobi, and Amidala as they dealt with matters on Naboo, putting a stop to the Trade Federation. During the resultant battle, Jinn and Kenobi were confronted by the Sith assassin Darth Maul, who slew Qui Gon before being killed by Kenobi. As his dying wish, Jinn asked Kenobi to take Skywalker as his apprentice, and Kenobi did so. In this, Qui Gon changed the course of galactic history. While the Sith ended up using Skywalker to destroy the Jedi Order, it was ultimately Skywalker who destroyed the Sith and allowed the Jedi to return, bringing an end to millennia of war between the light and the dark. Without the Chosen One, the Jedi would have likely suffered a far more comprehensive defeat at Darth Sidious's hands, and it's possible that the Force would have never returned to balance. Call it the butterfly effect or call it the will of the Force, but Qui Gon saved the galaxy. Though Qui Gon Jinn had an even more important role to play than just bringing Anakin into the Order. He showed Anakin what it truly meant to be a Jedi, leaving a lasting impact that influenced young Skywalker for the rest of his life. In this sense, he was the perfect Jedi to discover the Chosen One. Jinn's murky past had taught him, above all, the virtue of selflessness and caring for the lives of others. He showed Anakin that this was what Jedi were meant to be. Beings who help others even when it was unnecessary or inconvenient, and who were even willing to do so at the cost of their own lives. This ideal guided Skywalker in his journey along the path of the Jedi. It was this ideal that Skywalker saw embodied in his son, Luke, decades later, and it was this ideal that guided him to redemption in the end. In a way, Qui Gon Jinn both started and ended the story of Anakin Skywalker, and without him, the galaxy would have ended up in a much darker place. So, that's the story of Qui Gon Jinn and why he was the perfect Jedi to bring Anakin into the Order. But what do you think? Would you like to hear more about the exploits of Qui Gon and Obi-Wan? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. And as always guys, thank you so much for watching and I hope to see you in the next video.